Let's talk buyer assignment in Oracle Fusion. At some point during your implementation, the consultant's going to ask you, how do we route requisitions to buyers? And a lot of times they focus only on buyer assignment rules. Now, buyer assignment rules are one of 5 different layers or levers that we have in Oracle Fusion, which control how requisitions get routed. In fact, not knowing these different levers can mean sometimes things could fail or behave unexpectedly during a test. So understanding the way that they work together to control your requisition to buyer routing is important. Let's take a quick look at those different layers, starting with the BPA buyer. The first layer to consider is whether the opt-in inside of setup and maintenance in the purchasing section called assign requisition lines to the buyer on the source agreement is enabled or not. If this is enabled, and if it is a catalog requisition, then the BPA buyer will be assigned as the buyer for the requisition lines. No other rules or layers are processed until we get to the consolidation rule at the end. This means that a requisition following this process would skip buyer assignment rules. All right, layer to consider number 2, suggested buyer on the requisition line. This is a way for requesters, when they're placing a non-catalog requisition, to suggest who they would like to be the buyer for this requisition. It displays here, and if you put this value in, it will skip buyer assignment rules and head straight to the consolidation layer. Now you may be asking, can I control what goes in here? And the answer is yes. In Visual Builder Studio, you can control this field. It's in the source section, and you can make it required or optional. You can make it hidden or visible. You can make it read-only or editable, and you can set a static starting value. Layer number 3. And remember, this is where most people focus all of their time and energy. At this point, if we don't have a BPA buyer and we don't have a suggested buyer, then we evaluate the buyer assignment rules. A few of the fields are required. You must have a sequence number, and you must have a procurement business unit, and you must have a buyer. Beyond that, you have several other options that you can enter to derive a rule. You can enter the requisitioning BU or the commodity. Commodity is the same thing as purchasing category. Then you can set your deliver to organization, a project, cost center, supplier name, a flag for whether it is a non-catalog request or if it exceeds a certain line amount. Leading practice here is to set rules based on purchasing category, or in some cases, cost center, if you have linked your cost center to your deliver to locations. Then it is very common to have supplier callouts where you say, regardless of the category, all purchases for this supplier route through a certain buyer, based on, of course, the requisitioning business unit. Keep in mind that these rules are evaluated in order. Those sequence numbers don't have to just be integers. In fact, if you set your rules up as 1, 2, 3, or in this instance, 50, 51, and 52, and then you come up with a scenario that needs to fall in between, you'll have to use decimals like 50.1, 50.2. For this reason, to keep it simple, we do recommend leaving increments of at least 5 in between your rules. One good thing, you can manage these in a spreadsheet. This puts them in Excel where you can import and export them. It makes it friendlier to manage because most clients have hundreds to thousands of these. You can also group them into rule sets to make the management a little bit simpler. Here you can filter by rule set. And again, they're processed sequentially. The first line that applies to your requisition line is the line that gets applied. So you do need to take care of the order that you have these in. Another common question is, can we customize these or add additional columns? And the answer is not really. Now's a good time to think about, does our organization fit well and mesh with this structure, or do we need to make some tweaks? This is a foundational decision, and I think it's better to have a little bit of pain at the beginning of a project, working with the team on how you might need to change a little bit of the structure, instead of trying to build complicated workarounds that are going to cause technical debt and ongoing maintenance and a disconnect between what people see in the application and what gets put on the purchase orders for years and years to come. Again, leading practice recommendations are to segment your buyers based on that commodity or purchasing category, as well as supplier or cost center specific callouts. Some organizations that use project inventory might also need to have some project specific callouts. There are two fallback variables that you need to consider. The first is in PIM. Here, at each item and organization level, you have the ability and specifications for purchasing to set a default buyer. This is only evaluated if no buyer assignment rule is found. So remember, even if you put a default buyer here, if one of the preceding three layers identifies a buyer, then it won't choose the default buyer from PIM. Final fallback. If the line hasn't managed to find a buyer through any of the above leading layers, the last step it makes is checking at the procurement business unit for the default buyer assigned to that procurement unit. So if all else fails, a buyer is still assigned, even if it's not the one that you really wanted. This ensures that requisitions can get assigned to a buyer and could be processed even if they're touchless and even if all of your other configurations don't work as expected. One closing caveat that catches a lot of people by surprise. There is a profile option. These are controlled from setup and maintenance with the Manage Administrator Profile Values task, which is called For Assign Rec Same Buyer. This controls whether, after identifying all of those individual buyers line by line for the requisition, the system will automatically group them all into the same buyer. Some organizations like this because it means that from one requisition, you'll have one buyer that can help answer all of the questions. With this turned off, your requisition might be routed to 2, 3, 10, 100 buyers. And then when you have to follow up, you'd have to follow with multiple people. However, if this is turned on, then all of those requisitions that have each found their own line through one of their above causes, BPA buyer, suggested buyer, buyer assignment rules, or PIM, or the default buyer for that procurement org, are going to have that buyer overridden by the buyer value from the first line. This is a leading cause of people going, why in the world did this buyer get assigned to my requisitions? And a lot of times we'll leave it off to reduce confusion. So in closing, buyer assignment is much more than just the buyer assignment rules. Before we even get to buyer assignment rules, we have to check the opt-in for whether lines get assigned to the BPA buyer or not. We have to check if the requisition line has a suggested buyer. We can build layers and layers of buyer assignment rules. We have fallbacks based on the PIM default buyer and the procurement business unit default buyer. And then the consolidation caveat, which can confuse people if things get assigned to the first buyer that was identified on the requisition. My recommendation is don't think of an Oracle implementation as a lift and shift, where you take your existing rules and try to shove them into Oracle's framework. This is a great opportunity to ask your consultant for leading practice recommendations and to reconsider what are some of the best ways that we can, even considering organizational changes, better work hand in hand with our ERP.